Nice to meet you, everybody. I'm Debbie Henney, and I'm in Gilbert, Arizona right now, which is a suburb of Phoenix. And I see a lot of you chiming in the chat. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and tell us where you're joining us from. Looks like I see Colorado, Indiana, North Carolina, Michigan. A lot of states I saw on the news, covered on the news last night. Virginia, Missouri, good. Kansas, Florida. We've got a good representation. Some California, Texas, Illinois, Nevada, Illinois, Mississippi, New York, St. Louis. This is wonderful. So it looks like we have people in all the time zones. So for some of you, it's after dinner. For some of you, it's probably right before dinner. And some of you, this is dinner time. So we'll try to make this not painful so you can grab some dinner after this or before or whenever dinner time is for you. So this workshop tonight is going to feature one of the activities from our Realities of Socialism curriculum. And I just want to share a little background on where that came from. So let me share my screen. Let's see, number 3. Let me get you guys back. Let me just adjust really quick. I like to see all of your faces. Thank you for having your cameras on. We really like to make these feel like a workshop, even though we do them over Zoom. It's nice to feel like we're all here together. And we will be doing an activity in breakout rooms today. So it's good to be able to see the people that you're working with in that breakout room. So we partnered with this Realities of Socialism curriculum with a group, think tank in Canada called the Fraser Institute. And they do teacher programs, but they also sponsor a lot of research. And they had done a project called the Realities of Socialism, and they had some authors put together books basically on different countries and their experiences with socialism. And so the screen that I'm sharing is the Realities of Socialism homepage on the Fraser Institute's website. And what they wanted from us was to come up with some classroom lessons and activities. And so you'll see that the countries featured in this project were Poland, Sweden, Denmark, Estonia, and Singapore. And for each one of these countries, I'll show you Singapore, for example. For each one of the countries, there's a book that somebody wrote. So you can read the publication. They also have a video, like a little mini documentary. They have some podcasts. They have some short little videos about different topics, within that socialism. So these are all resources you can use. And they have quite a few infographics. And what we did, and then you can explore the book and you can jump around just chapter by chapter. You can see the 6 chapters are in this book. I think I have one of them here. Let me just show you. I need to clean my desk, but okay, so this is the one. This is the one from Poland. Oh, it's out of focus. I'll put it like this. And you can see it's quite a big book. There's a lot of information, a lot of content in there. And so what FTE did was they created, let me show you the Google Drive. You'll get this at the end of the workshop as well. There we go. So for each one of those lessons, I'm going to jump to part 3. That's where this activity is, and the Singapore. You'll see here's lesson 7 on Singapore. And instead of having to read the whole Singapore book, this is a document. I don't remember how long this one is, so I'll just open it up. But it kind of summarizes the main topics in there. And the background information is a summary of that book, but it's written for you, the teacher. This one looks like it's 8 pages without the preface stuff, probably 7 pages. Kind of a summary and a high level highlight. You could also assign it as a student reading. And then along with each one of these lessons comes an activity. And so today we have 2 activities, today we're doing one activity called Will the Real Socialism Please Step Forward? And so in this folder that you'll get, you're actually getting all of the curriculum, the lessons 1 through 7, and all of the activities, and the slides are included in there as well. So when I come back in here, you can see here's the lesson for activity 6, the Word document. And then you'll see the slides for activity 6 up here as well as some team slides that we'll be sharing on. So you have all of these resources. Eventually, they will be housed on the FTE website. We just transitioned to a new website, and we haven't got to the place yet where they've been able to make a home for the Realities of Socialism curriculum, but it will eventually end up there. But just so you know, you'll have all of that after today's workshop. Any questions about the curriculum? Just raise your Zoom hand. Let me open my chat really before we get started here. There we go. Okay. So let me go ahead and start this presentation. It's great to see some familiar faces back. I know some of you have been to other parts socialism workshops and seen some other pieces of it. We do have a program occasionally that we offer that's, I think we do it over 3 days, usually over a holiday weekend, where we've done the whole thing. I think we'll have one of those coming up again in the spring. So watch the FT announcements. Debbie Davis, do you know when the next programs are going to come out that they can sign up for? The, what do we call them, winter programs?
Yes, so hopefully the winter programs will be open next week. However, that's not a promise. Next week or in the next 2 weeks. That is our goal. But when that happens, I promise you will get a whole bunch of emails.
So watch your email about program announcements that are coming up. They do fill up really fast. I was doing a program in Baltimore a few weeks ago, and when I showed them the website and all the programs that we have, everything was full. And I was really, I was telling them, don't wait, there'll be more coming out for the winter. And so winter usually covers, from December and January. Does it go to February, Debbie?
It's, December, January, February.
Okay. And so watch for that. We have some fun programs coming up as well, but it's great to see you all here tonight. So I shared with you where you can see those podcasts and videos. And so this activity is called, Will the Real Socialism Please Step Forward? It's the last activity in the curriculum. And so, but it's okay that if you haven't attended any of the socialism workshops before. But one of the things we do in the first part of the curriculum is we define socialism. And the traditional definition of socialism that you've probably seen or encountered in textbooks or your resources probably looks something similar to this, that it's an economic system where the state controls the resources and makes decisions about production and equitable decisions. But one thing you find out in the first activity that you can do with your students, they get to participate in a poll that was done. It was a survey that was done across 4 countries, Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And they polled a whole bunch of people about their thoughts on socialism and then what they, or not just socialism, but different economic systems, and then what they thought the definitions of those systems were. And so your students do the same thing, and they get to see how their answers compare with the answers of people in those different countries. And what we find out is that there's much more support among younger generations, shocker, for socialism than there is among older generations, but that they also have a very different working definition of socialism than the classic definition that we've been taught or raised or think of socialism as. And so this is the traditional or a more modern definition of socialism. And it usually includes one of these 2 parts, either that the state provides more government services or a guaranteed annual income, or both of those things. And so that's when people talk about, especially particularly younger people, when they talk about socialism today, they're simply thinking of a government that provides more government services, or a government that provides some basic guaranteed annual income, or a combination of both of those things. One of the also in that first part of the curriculum, the first couple of lessons, we learn about some basic problems that you encounter with socialism. And some of these problems you can encounter in any economic system, but they tend to be particularly troublesome in socialist economies. And one of them is what we call the control problem. And so with this activity, we're coming back to these problems, and we're going to look for evidence of these in different countries. And so the control problem is the difficulty central planners have in controlling human wants and desires. One thing when you move decision making from individuals to central planners, central planners have a hard time controlling, like they may want you to behave in a certain way, but they don't have the ability to control you, your behavior or your actions. And that becomes problematic when you're trying to, when this is the way they want to produce things, this is the way they want to allocate things, and taking into account how people behave and act, we run into this control problem. And so what the activity we're going to do today, each group is going to be assigned a couple of countries, and you're going to be researching those countries and looking for evidences of these different country problems. So some questions that you might ask to look for the control problem. Do you see any evidence of the state trying to control human behavior? What economic system is prevalent? So we're going to be using the CIA World Factbook, and sometimes they will just define what the economic system is, and that gives you some clues. Sometimes in looking at other information in the CIA World Factbook, we'll find other clues or evidence of how they try to control human behavior. Another problem that we run into is what we call the knowledge problem. This is the idea that the information for economic planning is distributed across individual members of society, and it can't be known by central planners. Even if you pick the most brilliant, knowledgeable, most educated people to be the decision makers, there's no way that they can know everything about everyone and all the resources and to make the decisions. It becomes problematic. And so questions you might ask to look for evidence of the knowledge problem, is there evidence of free markets? The more that you see free markets, the less of a knowledge problem you run into, because in markets, people or those individuals with the information, they end up being the actors in an economy, the ones that are making decisions about how much do I want to purchase, how much do I want to sell, those kind of things. The less the presence of markets, the more you're going to run into the knowledge problem when things are allocated in other ways besides markets. So looking for evidence of markets or the lack thereof. Another problem is what we call the incentive problem. The incentive problem is the problem that occurs with central planning when individuals and central planners are not incentivized to serve the general interest. So sometimes we run into this even with our own government. We get frustrated that the outcomes, they're doing things for different incentives and not necessarily making decisions that serve the general outcome. Maybe they're making decisions that best serve their job or keeping their job. And in socialist economies, you see this same kind of thing. There's an incentive problem because there's a lack of markets at this time. Well, let me just make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. There we go. Okay. There's a lack of incentives to respond to. And so people end up responding to incentives that aren't necessarily planned. Even the decision makers have different incentives. Instead of doing something that's profitable and providing something that people want, they're responding to their managers and their directors and whoever's in charge and following those rules, as opposed to start doing what's best for the economy as a whole. So a question you could ask to look for evidence of the incentive problem would be, is there evidence or lack thereof of entrepreneurship? Entrepreneurship is a great example of people responding to incentives. Entrepreneurs solve problems. They look for problems and then they look for solutions to those problems, things that will make people, better off. And so the more entrepreneurship there is, the less of an incentive problem there's going to be. The less in entrepreneurship, the more of an incentive problem you would see. The last problem is what we call the pathologies of privilege. And this is the problem that occurs in central planning when bureaucrats gain power and some are privileged over others. And so even though the goal is to have a more equitable, society, it ends up being that you have these bureaucrats or people in charge, and the closer you are to the power and the people that are in charge, the more privilege that you have, the more benefits that you have. You might be able to make decisions that benefit you and your family better than other people would have that same freedom to make those kind of decisions. And so what you would look for here is evidence of corruption. Do you see evidence of corruption amongst government or in the society? Any questions about these different problems? Okay, so this is going to be the shared Google slide that we're going to work on. And so, Debbie Davis, if you'll put this link in the chat. For everybody. Okay, so go ahead and click on that link in the Zoom chat. And it's going to open up a shared deck of slides. Now, don't start typing anything yet on the slides. What you'll notice at the top of each slide is 2 countries will be listed. The example I'm showing you here has Poland and Turkmenistan. And then there's a link right above that that takes you to the CIA World Fact Book. I'm going to escape out of this presentation and see if I can move the Zoom window to get over here. So this is the CIA World Fact Book, and I've pulled it up for Singapore. Singapore isn't one of the countries that we'll be doing today, but I just want to give you an example for Singapore. When you get to the CIA World Fact Book, at the top right, there's a section that's called countries, and then it's alphabetical. If I click on S, I can scroll down here and find Singapore. And now it tells me all this information about Singapore. And you could just scroll through, or you can use this black menu on the left to jump to different sections. And so some things that might be helpful would be to look up what kind of government they have. And so here it tells me a little bit about, they have a parliamentary republic. I might want to know about their economy. And here it tells me a little bit of an overview of their economy. Under communications, there might be some helpful information. One thing I found under communications that was surprising, when I got to broadcast media, it said the state controls broadcast media in Singapore, which I didn't know. And so they have 6 domestic TV stations. They're all owned and operated by MediaCorp, which is a state-owned investment company. And satellite dishes are banned. So this is an example of the government trying to control behavior. Another one, when you scroll down to the end under transnational issues, it talks about illicit drugs. And it says drug abuse is very limited because they have very aggressive law enforcement efforts. Another example of trying to control human behavior. It also says that Singapore is vulnerable as a venue for money laundering, which is evidence of corruption. And so these are the kind of things you're going to be looking for, and you can tag team it. You'll have a team, so you can kind of say, why don't you look at this section, I'll look at this section, and look for evidence, and then you'll go back to, let me get to the slides. There we go, to the team slides, and you'll fill out the information in these different boxes. And so when you're sent into your breakout rooms, if you're in breakout room 1, you're going to stay on slide 1 here. If you're sent to breakout room 2, you'll move yourself to slide number 2 because you don't want to type on some other team slide. So breakout room 3 will use slide 3, breakout room 4 will use slide 4, and so on. I see we even have some people that have jumped to slide number 7. So just make sure that you're on the slide that matches your breakout room, so you're all typing and seeing the same information. Okay? And the link to the CIA World Fact Book is at the top of that slide. So if you're in the slides, you can link to the CIA World Fact Book. You can also just Google it. Any questions before we send you away into breakout rooms? Looks like everybody's back. Welcome back, everybody. Let me go ahead and share my screen again. There we go. I'm on slide 1, so we can see group 1's work on here. Let me make you guys all bigger. There we go. All right, we're going to start with group 1, and they're going to tell us, we'll start with Poland, and they're going to tell us how many, the question is, will the real socialism please step forward? Let me go back to these presentation slides. So socialism step forward, 1 to 4. We're going to go in this order. We'll go Poland, Turkmenistan, Cuba, Denmark, and so on. And your group is going to tell us how many steps forward would you take and then why. And you can use some of the evidence from your table to tell us why you guys decided that. So who in group one wants to tell us about Poland? This is Amy, Gregory, Matt, Richard, Sammy.
That would be me.
Thank you.
So we basically decided that Poland is just one step forward, and Turkmenistan is 4.
Okay.
And
tell us just about Poland. Why did you say 1?
Mostly because they're not, when we looked at like their agriculture and industry, the state isn't really controlling much of that. It was under the Soviet Union, but then when they got out from under that, then they kind of can have their own direction to go on that one. And they stopped really focusing on heavy industry, which tends to be more of a socialized, leaning more towards the communist realm. And then they, of course, have free elections. So that tends to be less socialist because the government's not controlling who gets picked.
Okay. Let's jump to Team 5, who also had Poland. Team 5, what can you guys add? Tell us how many steps forward you took for Poland and why.
I'll speak for our group. We also gave Poland a 1 just because of where they used to be. But we did note that they don't use the euro, even though they're part of the EU. So even though they are part of a major trade bloc, they still like some of their independence.
Okay.
Could cause issues in the future.
All right. And you guys noted on there that there was nearly half a century of totalitarian rule. The lesson that goes along with Poland kind of focuses on that period that they had in their experience with socialism and out of socialism. But they have come up with a way to really overcome a lot of these problems that we're looking at today. Okay, let's go back to Turkmenistan, and we'll start with group 5. Who from your group wants to talk about Turkmenistan?
We gave them a rating of 3 just because they're still authoritarian. And it seems like all their exports are with Russia and China.
Okay. And group 1?
It seems like it's...
Oh, go ahead, Nydia. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Nydia?
Oh, no, it's fine.
Okay, sorry, I cut you off there. Okay, group 1, what else can you guys add for Turkmenistan?
For Turkmenistan, we went with a 4.
Okay.
Mostly because the state really controls the means of enterprise. There wasn't a lot of outlet for free enterprise. And then most of the natural resources are controlled by the state. So like the pipeline, petroleum, natural gas. And then they also restrict internet usage for their citizens. So that felt a little controlling to us.
Very controlling. Yeah. Hard to imagine what that would be like.
Yeah.
Every country has some element of central planning. And I'm sure a lot of you, I heard some of you talking when you were in your groups about teaching like comparative economic systems or comparative politics. It's really like we all exist on a continuum. And so this is just looking at some of that. Countries that have found ways, well, I'll save that for the end. Let's keep going. Let's go to group 2. Group 2, this is, let's see who's in group 2. Christina, Jonathan, Kay, Laura, and Milan. And you guys have Cuba and Denmark. Who wants to talk about Cuba?
So I'll talk about Cuba.
Thank you.
I will do Denmark.
Okay. We'll start with Cuba.
Okay. We gave it a 4. When you look at it, I mean, of course, Cuba was communist for years. It still is communist, just not quite as much. They have opened up for some privatization, but for the most part, the government does control the resources. They control the media completely. The army has a big say in the economy. They have dealings in finance and tourism and import and export and all sorts of stuff like that. There's obvious issues of corruption. They refuse to join the International Court of Justice. You have one legal political party. yeah, there's a lot there that can go for it. They do have some limited privatization that basically started your late 90s, early 2000s, but it is still really rather limited.
Okay. And group 6, what can you guys add for Cuba?
We also gave it a 4. I
Okay.
think one of the things that was most surprising about it is that it stated that private citizens are prohibited from buying computers or accessing the internet without special authorization. So that definitely allows the government to function in a more corrupt fashion and to control all sorts of information in or out, as well as to control markets and who can sell what and where and when, because there's no opportunity even for online enterprise.
Yeah. And one of your groups, I forget which team it was, it mentioned something about immigration, that they have a problem with people leaving the country illegally, like they control who can exit the country as well. In the last workshop we did with this, that featured this curriculum, there was a teacher who had traveled to Turkmenistan to hike some, mountain that was there. And he just echoed everything that everybody found. It's a country we don't hear a lot about, but they are very closed, very controlled. Not a lot of people have had the experience of being there. So that was an added bonus in that workshop. All right, let's go back up to group 2. Let's stay actually with group 6 and tell us about Denmark. How many steps forward did you say for Denmark, group 6? Who wants to talk? This is Matthew, Tracy, Quanta, and Taryn. Tracy, there we go.
We thought Denmark was a 1. It's one of the least corrupt countries in the world with a lot of transparency. We thought there are some challenges. There's a tight labor market. There's a higher average retirement age. They do have high income. There is a lot of trade orientation, pharmaceuticals, energy. But yeah, there is some reliance on migrant workers for their tight labor market. But a challenge might be for entrepreneurship would be there is a high percentage of the population that is employed by the government, by the public sector. So that might be some difficulties with entrepreneurship. But it is rated one of the least corrupt countries in the world.
Yeah, great job on that one. How about group 2? Anything you can add that you found for Denmark?
Thanks, Debbie. Honestly, for group 2, we didn't come to a conclusion. I was between a 1 or a 0.5 in regards to Denmark. I did like how the government does provide some incentives for entrepreneurs, but I coming from California, like we could be our own country. So when I look at Denmark, they're part of the EU. So that's where I was kind of perplexed. I didn't know what was what was an adequate score for them. So I'm going to say 0.5 to 1.0. It was interesting to see how the Denmark government, if you see on our slide for group 2, provides some kind of incentives for entrepreneurship. So I thought that was exciting. And again, they're trade oriented. So obviously they're an EU member. So, they've got their trading partners. Okay. So that's all I've got. So Matthew, thank you. You took the lead on that. Appreciate it.
Great job, you guys. Not a lot of evidence anymore for socialism in Denmark, even though they did have their own experience with socialism at one point. Okay, let's go to group 3. Who in group 3 wants to tell us about Estonia? This is Abigail, Chassie, Mallory, Mackenzie, and Ted.
I can. So, Estonia is probably a 1 or, maybe a 0.5. There's a lot of evidence like against socialism. They've got like independent judiciary. They've got private radio stations and a growing number of them. They are part of the EU. They're a parliamentary republic, really pretty open market with very minimal like state or government control. They regained their freedom in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it's pretty, obviously there's some government interventions there, but it's pretty
Pretty limited.
capitalist society.
Yeah. Okay. How about group 7? What can you guys add to that for Estonia?
Not really a whole lot. I noted that they, really only been truly independent for minimal years. Like the country's only 100 years old, and they've been independent for very few of that 100 years. One of the things I noticed was that they have a very limited number of trade partners. So there is some evidence of government control there. I think they would have more trade partners if it weren't so tightly held. But the document didn't say that. So that's, kind of an inference. But really not much else to add. I think it is interesting that most of their energy related items are imports. And because they have so few partners, that does run the risk of extreme expense, which could be problematic. Having lived in California, I know how easy it is to run into problems when your energy provider ups the ante. So, that's something that could be problematic. But it's unfortunate that most of their energy has to come, or energy resources come from outside of the country.
Yeah. I think that's something that is surprising once students start looking at these countries. A lot of they're so much smaller, many of them, than the United States, and thus have to be dependent on trade for really important things like energy.
Debbie, I have to ask why I couldn't find the level of taxations for my particular country. And why is that? Maybe it was just my country. I'm kind of curious why that's not. I thought that would be a critical piece. And that's what I was
Some
looking
of
for, and
the
I couldn't find it.
CA fact book information, for some countries, there's just pages of information, and others, there's just less information. I don't know enough, other than I think some of it they just don't have access to like they do more open economies like Canada. I was going to use as an example instead of Singapore, but I just kept scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and I thought let's pick one that has a little bit more bite-sized or manageable information. But that's a good thing to point out. Let's stay with group 7 and let's talk about North Korea. So who in group 7 wants to tell us about North Korea? How many steps forward did you take?
So we said it was 4 steps forward. And we said because it had a planned economy, poor exchange rate stability, they're dependent on China, and just all the other many other characteristics of socialism.
Okay. And group 3, what can you add to that for North Korea? How many steps forward did you guys take?
I think we said 5 leaps forward.
Yeah, 5 giant leaps.
Okay, giant leaps. Anything you guys can add for North Korea?
There's like no independent media. The one thing that struck me was the radios or TVs are sold pre-tuned to the government channels. So there's only, I think, 4 of them. So you buy a radio and you can't even get anything else except for what they want you to hear.
Yeah. And to answer one of Milan's questions was that you guys pointed out they don't publish reliable national income account data. And so there's just things we don't know because they don't share. All right. Good job, you guys.
Or things that we're not even sure is true that they do share.
That's right. I know.
That too.
I do like to watch North Korea videos on TikTok. So of people that get in and they're filming and they're told specifically, do not film this. And that yet they still try to film it. And I'm like, North Korea is not a place I would want to be found breaking the rules, but I'll watch their TikTok. So, all right. Let's go to team 4, Sweden and Venezuela. Tell us about Sweden, team 4. How many steps forward?
So we were kind of debating with Sweden, but we kind of settled with 2 being a good number. Just because whenever you talk to kids, they always are like, well, Sweden, Sweden's doing this, Sweden's doing that. That's the one that they always bring up, but it's because they used to be under socialism in the 90s and they just kind of, have been moving more towards free market. But we still see a little bit more government control when it comes to like the social aspects. I meant not that they're like controlling, but they have that safety net with like the welfare programs and then the high taxes. I'm at 42 and it's like Venezuela's like, 20 or, like pretty nearby. So it's a little bit of a scary number. We're like, ooh, that's a lot of taxes. But they hold elections, so they do have rights. So that's kind of where we landed was being the two steps.
Okay. And let's jump to team 8, who also had Sweden. What can you guys add? Tell us how many steps forward you took and why. This is Cheryl, Carrie, Kristen, and Teddy.
We thought Sweden was very small, so we said one step.
Okay.
We kind of like it has a mixed kind of economy. We also picked up on the fact, like somebody else said, that it's in the EU but doesn't really participate. But basically a 1.
Okay. Yeah, they are they do have that reputation, but when you start digging and looking, what you really find is evidence of a lot of free markets and an open economy today, which surprises people. So the lesson that in this curriculum about Sweden takes, students through that journey so they can see the experience that they had with socialism and understand better where they are today. They do have a big welfare state, which is what, one of the things that people do point to. Okay, how about Venezuela? We'll stick with group 8. How many steps forward did you guys say for Venezuela?
I was trying to find my unmute button.
Thanks.
Venezuela's just it's kind of a hot mess. Not like as bad as North Korea, but it's not great. Probably a 4. Lot of issues with government control. There's actually some boycotts on their government. There's been a lot of restrictions on free speech, the press. Everything's very clamped down for the most part. Had a lot of election problems as well. All kinds of government-owned systems. The oil companies are all owned by, military officers or government officials or like oligarch type of things. There's a lot of shortages. Hyperinflation's a problem, illicit drugs. There's just a lot going on that's not going very well. A lot of mismanagement by the government and lack of investment and lack of incentives for, entrepreneurs. There's just a lot of sad stuff going on in Venezuela.
Yeah. And let's go to team 4. Anything you guys can add or interesting things you found out about Venezuela, and how many steps forward did you say?
Yeah, we figured a lot of steps. Maybe 3.5. They relaxed a few things from what I read. There wasn't a lot of information, unfortunately, about what's going on in Venezuela. I thought it could have used some more. Like their broadcast services, really no competition for that. Like broadband, I'm sorry, like that's not very good at all, and it's lacking. It's slow. But they do have some broadcast media like TV stations and stuff like that where it's a private enterprise. And while it was already mentioned that they have the government's kind of screwed up some of their investments in infrastructure, they have also released a little bit of being able to import materials to the private sector as well. So not there's a few things that they're doing. So maybe you could give them a little bonus of a half a step. 44% of the GDP comes from taxes. So that seems to be a lot, but they don't have a lot of public debt. So the people who are under the second thing for second definition for socialism might be disappointed because their services seem to have gone down. They're not providing much for education, and their medical system is in disarray, and it's not very good. They're not providing much for that either. So I guess it depends on how you look at it. But yeah, it's corrupt and lots of bad things, lots of inflation. So not good there.
That's a good paradox that you point out, that in order to provide government services, countries have to have a lot of wealth and resources in the first place. And if you want them to be able to provide more government services, you need, resources and production. And so that becomes a problem, especially for somebody like Venezuela, who's had such a hit to their economy. Then they actually end up not being able to provide those services that people wanted in the first place. So, but still lots of control. All right, great job, you guys. I'm going to jump back over here to the slideshow. So what's the takeaway from this activity, or when we look at countries, that maybe have been associated with socialism in the past? Many countries that are considered socialist today have had experiments with socialism, but have moved towards more market-oriented economies. While they may provide more government services, like when we think about Sweden and Denmark, while they may provide more government services, through more economic freedom, they have overcome the problems of control, knowledge, and incentives that continue to plague modern socialist economies today. And so this lesson is kind of a capstone lesson on the curriculum that gives the students some ability to go out there and explore different countries, apply what they've learned, see those problems in action, and see how countries that still maybe provide a lot of those government services that students want are able to pair that with a lot of open economy and economic freedom that helps overcome some of those problems. So here is the link to the curriculum if you want to take a picture. If you want it on your computer, let me drop this link in the chat right now. I think it'll go to everybody here. Can you see that, Debbie Davis? Okay. So there's the link in the chat. If you want to open it up on your computer, if you want to open it on your phone, you can take a picture of the QR code. And that will take you to the Google Drive that has the 3 folders, the part 1, part 2, and part 3. This lesson is in part 3. It's called Activity 6. Will the real socialism please step forward? And you have the slides in there as well. I refresh or I'll clean up these slides. When you use them, you're welcome to make your own copy. But if you get in there, if you just use the ones that are linked, like right now, if you go to that link, you'll see all your responses. I just clean it up and delete them and it'll be fresh. And sometimes teachers just use that link, which is fine. If you get in there and some other teacher has used it and there's responses, just delete it and start with a fresh slides. But I always recommend just making a copy of everything so you have your own copy for yourself. Okay, any questions before we wrap things up?
Debbie, you raise a good point about the old traditional definition of socialism, but now in more recent years, it's usually younger people having this more modern socialism idea, which tends to be more of the Northern European countries like Denmark, Sweden. So I guess is the term socialism now just kind of outdated, or is it a generational misunderstanding? People are having of what is not socialism.
I think it's a term that comes with a lot of baggage. And so if we're going to talk about it in the classroom, it's important that we define it and that we so that people understand, because students do support and they do find a lot of things that they like about those countries you mentioned, those Nordic countries. And so it's important that they understand what do we mean when we talk about socialism, and that even in those countries that they're pointing to, they're not socialists by that traditional definition that we think of, that we were raised with and saw in our textbooks. And so that's part of the purpose of this curriculum, is to come up with to break down what do we mean when we say socialism. And, what are the things that you like about those countries that maybe you consider socialist? But when we talk about traditional socialism, it's the reason that so many older generations are so opposed to it. It's because they've seen all the problems that come with it and how hard it is to overcome those problems. So I don't think we can get rid of the term because, language takes on, it has its own path, and words mean things, and the meanings of those words change over time. So I just think it's important that we as teachers understand that when our students say socialism, they probably don't mean what we mean. And so we have to make sure we're all on the same page and we're clear. And so be clear when you're talking about traditional socialism. And then when they talk about more socialist countries today that they associate with that, just be clear that there's still a lot of economic freedom in those countries today. Good question. Any other questions or comments? Okay. All right. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. We'll leave the link up there and keep this open for just a minute, but everybody else, we'll see you hopefully at the next workshop. Bye, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Bye.
guys.